Hey everyone, I wanted to try something a little bit different from my usual reviews. Thus, I thought about making it into a series of videos I'll title YAP Session, or YAP Sesh for short. Basically, in these videos, don't expect my usual style of research or script writing. I'm just talking off the top of the dome here, writing stream of consciousness or just reminiscing and stuff like that. Anyways, if you've been watching my videos for a while, you'd probably know about my video, I Miss Saturday Morning Cartoons. This is like the second time I've mentioned this video in a month. I had a small section where I talk about the Disney era Power Rangers. Now, obviously, I didn't go into a lot of detail into each season in that video, outside of like incredibly short reviews. That got me thinking, maybe it's just me and the friends around me, but can we agree that the Disney era might be the best era of Power Rangers? I'm being 100% when I say this. The Disney era is pretty damn consistent with quality. There's probably only one show in this era that I'd say is arguably bad, and truthfully, this might make some of the 90s kids in the crowd mad, but the Disney era holds up much better than some of the shows in the 90s. Don't get it twisted, there's still Time Force, In Space, Lost Galaxy, Lightspeed Rescue. All of those are great shows. But that's like under half of the era. In fact, that's only like 4 out of the 10 seasons that came out during Saban's time. And this is where we'll probably get to my most controversial opinion. I don't really like the Zordon era stuff. I know, put the pitchforks away, okay? And before you hit me with the, there'd be no Power Rangers without that era. Yeah, I get that. I know, I really do. I respect it for what it is, I just don't think it holds up writing-wise. A lot of the characters are just kind of flat, especially for the Rangers. Half the time I actually root for the villains to win because I find them way more entertaining. I'm not saying that it's terrible or anything, but I don't think we start getting genuinely great seasons of Power Rangers until In Space. And that's funny because that's the literal end of the Zordon era. I think this is partly because there's even less status quo that they could fall onto for support. Don't get me wrong, the status quo can be a good thing, but I feel like it's commonly used as a crutch, and at times can even actively harm the writing of a series. That's why shows like Time Force work so well, because the only status quo that it really has to rely on is the concept of a Ranger team. But they aren't locked into using Zordon or Alpha or the same group of villains every single episode. No, instead, the writers are allowed to create their own new narratives without relying on any characters that reasonably ran out of steam seasons ago. I'm always the type of guy that prefers a fresh start instead of digging into the past, which is something that current Power Rangers seems to not understand. And that brings us to when Disney basically bought Power Rangers right out from Saban. Nowadays, Disney buying your franchise almost feels like a death sentence. I mean, they massively fucked up the Star Wars sequel trilogy, of which George Lucas already gave them an outline and they refused to do it. Basically killed the Muppets, and who the hell knows what Marvel Studios has been doing besides taking Robert Downey Jr.'s back shots. And yet, I'd say in the 2000s, Disney gave Power Rangers a second wind. For one, it seemed to be dying in the ratings, which is wild because Time Force and Lightspeed Rescue are that good. On top of getting that Disney money, mind you as well, they were getting a lot of money. This is Disney post-Renaissance, and this is during the era of what a lot of people would call the peak Disney Channel. Actually, they kept a lot of the same staff who worked on previous shows of PR onto their new shows, which is good for them since these writers were so comfortable with the series, but they actually moved the production over to New Zealand. Why? Because it's cheaper to film there in comparison to America, and it's actually much easier to ship stuff from Japan to New Zealand than it is the US. And that meant that Disney basically was able to let them do as much as they want because their budget was being spent less on sending crap back and forth. Hell, this also gave them enough budget for Disney to basically make a lot of their own props. It helped that the writers around this era tended to stick closer to what the Super Sentai show originally was doing versus just making a completely new idea. Except RPM, that show was like, I think, the only exception to that rule. Maybe it's just me, but you can kind of tell when a Power Rangers show's theme is completely detached from the one they introduced in the Super Sentai season. Like, it isn't too noticeable in some shows like In Space, which is adapted from Denji Sentai Mega Ranger, which is technology and cyberspace themed, but other times you can really tell. I love Lost Galaxy, but I didn't really click together the whole theme between swords and animals to the space concept. Well, that's because the show they adapted was Seiju Sentai Gingaman, which was themed around ideas of horsemen, knights, and environmentalism. Now, it doesn't ruin the whole show, but I do believe visual and thematic cohesion makes for a great Power Ranger show, and it doesn't confuse the dumb kids who'd watch it, like me. I think the Disney era shows stayed much closer to their Super Sentai counterparts. Sure, it was never one-to-one, but they kept many of the same motifs and ideas, and I think this allows the writers a bit more room for error if they're struggling with an episode plot. Running out of ideas? Well, let's check the original Sentai. Of course, with Disney's help, they also had more power in what new ideas they wanted to add. In fact, the Disney era has a higher count of original fights they recorded in comparison to the Saban era. With that, they could also build new, elaborate sets that they needed for an episode. It makes me think of that one episode in Ninja Storm where the Thunder Rangers are stuck in a popcorn bucket. Realistically, they had zero need to show that, but they did because they need to sell the idea to the audience. Writing in these seasons also got a lot more streamlined without relying too heavily on previous lore introduced in the Saban era. They were allowed to tackle different ideas for characters and even get more complex themes too. One such show that does this is the phenomenal SPD. This show in particular tackles some pretty mature themes and also remixes around ideas in the Power Rangers formula. The show covers ideas of how a police force should interact with its community, but also how to interact with different groups, but also covering themes of legacy, responsibility, and even Survivor's Guild. They also have an interesting Red Ranger, Jack, and he doesn't really want to be a Red Ranger. It's such a breath of fresh air that a lot of these seasons have characters reacting differently to becoming a Ranger, and even having characters who choose to stop being Rangers when it's over because that's just not what they want in life. Of course, this isn't the only example. The other shows that have some pretty in-depth ideas are RPM and even Dino Thunder to some extent. But what this really shows off is that this era was allowed to experiment and grow into a new identity. It didn't have to rely on years of lore anymore. Not that it didn't want to. Dino Thunder is a great example of how they paid respects to the previous Ranger series, but also allowing it to function on its own. And this show still stands on its own really well, but also functions as a great anniversary season. And if I'm being real, it's the only good anniversary season of Power Rangers, but it uses prior elements of the series to its benefit by making them fresh again. And I mean, if you ask me, bringing back Tommy as a mentor figure is the best idea they could have had for an anniversary season. He is the most iconic Power Ranger, and thus he deserves to set the standard for the following generations. I'd say the Disney era as a whole was a natural extension of what the creatives were trying to do in the post-Zordon era of Power Rangers, but with a little bit extra backing to push it further, which is sadly, I think, is something that ends with the Disney era. I've really been thinking about this because, as of recently, it's been said that Power Rangers is getting some kind of reboot or revival on Disney+. Now, I doubt that Disney is the main creative voice in this project. If anything, it's probably more in control of Hasbro than anything. But the rumors is that it might be yet another reboot of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. And that honestly just makes me groan in irritation because Power Rangers has already shown us that, like Super Sentai, its strength was that it could always refresh itself and give us new things. As of lately, Hasbro has not seemed to recognize this at all. Hell, almost all the toys they put out there are tied to Mighty Morphin in some way. It's a brand that feels like it's holding itself back by sticking too close to its roots. And that's what made the Disney era, in my opinion, the best era. It knew when to take a different direction, when to stick to what's known, and when to make something that's completely new. It was constantly building on itself and painting with new colors and different styles. Part of me hopes that this new Power Rangers takes more from the Disney era and does something new. There's been a ton of great Super Sentai shows that have come out in the meantime and haven't been adapted. I'd recommend adapting Boom Boonger if you ask me. Seems like it'd make for a fun show. It's a sort of mix of what's familiar and what's not. Or if they're gonna make an original story with zero borrowing from Super Sentai, then at least try to make something actually original. So, at the end of it all, what I'm trying to say is, Hasbro, we have enough Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, you can stop fucking making it now. Alright, well that's all I gotta say on that. Again, this is kind of just a YAP session. So if you agree with me, if you don't, let me know in the comments and maybe keep it respectful, huh? With that being said, I'll see you next time.